Good evening, everyone. I'm Nathan Shapura, political advisor at the European People's Party. On behalf of the EPP, welcome to another episode of EPP Family Talks. Over the past 2.5 months, we've had the pleasure of speaking with leaders from throughout our political family about the ideas and projects they've been working on, in particular during this time of coronavirus crisis. This evening, it is our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Andrey Kovatchev, EPP Vice-President, Vice Chair of the EPP Group in the European Parliament, and the head of our Bulgarian delegation in the EPP Group. Dr. Kovatchev, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us this evening.
Good evening from my side, Nathan, and thank you very much for this opportunity to all of the people who like to follow our family talk on the EPP webpage to do this.
The first question we've been asking all of our leaders to start this interview series is just the basic personal question. How are you doing? How have you been coping, adapting during these past few months of pandemic?
As everybody, we are human beings, and there was a lot of question marks because our generation never was confronted with such a situation of a pandemic, with so many unknown consequences. So I stayed with as everybody at home. I worried about my family and went to the shop, cooked at home, worried about the children, and how they can continue their education, and for sure also talking with my colleagues what we can do best and how we can tackle this extraordinary situation for all of us.
We've also been asking all of our leaders just for an update on their home countries. So your home country, Bulgaria, is of course led by our EPP friend Vojko Borisov, and your party, Citizens for European Development of Bulgaria. So how are things on the ground now in your country?
We started a bit earlier with the measurement, with the lockdown, and at the beginning there was very slow the spread of the virus, and we had a very little casualties, but now in the last few days or week, as the people are much more relaxed and opened their houses, they went out, there's a bit of increase in the numbers. I hope very much that we can control this, not only in Bulgaria, but in the European Union and worldwide, that we are not going to risk or to become a second wave of the infection, which will be very bad for the economy, but also for all of us as human beings and as people who can very easily risk our life.
Maybe just a follow-up question specific to Bulgaria. What are some of the important, really most important concrete steps for preventing, let's say, this second wave, or for protecting citizens against such a thing, such a problem with the second wave?
As we didn't have experience before with such kind of virus, the best was and stay the social distance, the wearing of mask in closed places, and the limiting of number of people who are together, but everything is depending on our responsibility. Without responsibility, doesn't matter what kind of measure the people, the states are taking, the municipalities are taking, the governments are taking, European Union is taking. If there is not a personal responsibility, then we risk the life of and the health of our families and of our friends and of everybody around us. Hopefully, this virus will be limited to local small herd of new infections and not of a global pandemic effects. And hopefully, as soon as possible, we have an effective vaccine and effective treatment of the virus.
I would just ask you now a similar question, but looking at the EU level more broadly. Across the European Union, this virus has cost the lives of more than 132,000 people. The European Commission has projected an economic contraction of over 7%. So when you look at the situation we're in now and you look back at the response the EU has taken as a whole in the last few months. What would you say has been the positive, maybe what has been lacking? What would the next steps, what should the next steps be when you look at the situation as a whole?
We should be, and we must be very self-critical because we are European Union. And at the beginning, we was a bit slow with the communication. We let other players outside of the European Union to lead on the communication with pictures, with videos, and making European Union looking slow and inefficient. This initial slow response in communication was overcome, and now we have a very clear communication line that European Union in reality is providing much more support to the member states, to the affected regions in the member states, to the citizens, to the people, with medical protection, with medical equipment, with medicines, but also with human resources like doctors and nurses, and on our international cooperation and trade. We have to take the consequences. We find out that many active substances, for example, for antibiotica, are produced in India or in China. This we should not allow anymore. It means we are working, and this is the EPP line of the so-called strategic autonomy of the European Union, that we are not depending only on one source of providing medical equipment or protection equipment or medicines in the future. So we invest from our European taxpayer money, we will invest in this protection for every citizens of the European Union, that we have on time, if needed, protection, equipment, and medicine.
So you mentioned, for example, expertise of doctors and nurses. There have been, of course, a lot of examples, very positive examples of solidarity shown, by member states, one for the other. And you also mentioned strategic autonomy, a very important concept, which has to do with trade, for example, and other elements, manufacturing. One of the other things people have been talking a lot about, especially maybe recently, is tourism and opening borders again. I think this is something which affects a lot of member states, including Bulgaria. What are maybe some concrete next steps you would hope to see as far as opening of borders or people being able to travel and resume some of those sorts of normal economic activities?
Indeed, the most affected sectors, that was tourism, the small and medium enterprises, the sector of restaurants, shops, and there is where we should support them with different measures to overcome the difficult economical situation for them. Indeed, my country also relied very much on tourism, as quite a significant number of percentage from the GDP is coming from tourism. This is valid for many countries in the European Union. And this is why we need a common European response on how we can open the borders now from tomorrow, from 1st of July, for which countries, and how we can, from one side, keep the free movement, and from other side, to, based on the experience, what we gain with the virus until now, to make it as less probable the infection during the tourism season or during the vacation of everyone from us. If you go to a hotel, if you go in the restaurant, if you go in a bar, that all the necessary measures are taken. And again, I will come to the word which is for us as the EPP very important: the responsibility of everybody, of the industry, of the restaurants, of the owners, of the tourist sector, of the tourists as well, of us as citizens, that we depend on each other. The clients depend on a good or service, what they expect from the tourism. The tourism will depend on the clients. And if we have trust with each other, then everything will go smooth and we will overcome this crisis. If we lose trust and the people are afraid to go to the hotel or afraid to go to the restaurants and to the bars, then that will be very bad for the both sides, for the tourists, for the clients, but also for the industry at all. It's a whole.
Let's talk a bit about foreign policy external to the European Union. I know one of the things you're very active in working on is the Western Balkans region, so I want to ask you about that. But first, I actually want to ask you about the transatlantic relationship. Just a few weeks ago, there was a big celebration of the end of World War II, commemoration of the end of World War II. The Bulgarian foreign minister, for example, joined with ministers from the United States, Czechia, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, in making a very strong statement for freedom. And I just wanted to ask you, why is such a statement of freedom, and in particular, the transatlantic piece, the element about the transatlantic relationship, why is it still so important, so vital of a message?
We should never forget what's happened on our continent a few decades ago. This is the great idea of the unity of the European Union, that on our soil in Europe, we should never allow to have a suffering, a war, killing of people. This is the main reason for the existing of the European Union. All these other reasons, economy, free market, it's great, but we should not take it for granted that that was always like this, freedom, and always less and no suffering and no killing each other. This is why the history need to be, or the memory of the history need to be transferred to the young generation, but not falsification of the history. And I'm very happy that Central Eastern European countries signed this declaration together with the United States on the historical facts that the end of the Second World War and the division of our continent bring not freedom and not liberty for half of the Europe, for the Central and Eastern European countries, which was occupied by the Stalin army and suffered for decades under the communist dictatorship. This history we should never forget, and we should never repeat. The young generation should become also some kind of vaccination against extreme ideology from the left and from the right by learning, teaching the objective historical interpretation from the 20th century.
Well, I think a very good
I forgot, on transatlantic, very important. Our link to the transatlantic cooperation is of highest importance from the European Union. We are talking about European Defense Union, or pooling and sharing of our resources in the defense sector. But this is on the top to our activities or our responsibility, as many of the European Union member states are also member states of NATO 21. That means we talk not to replace our engagement in NATO, but to do our additional work to strengthen the cooperation in Europe within the NATO framework, which for us is very important. And the NATO, the Washington Treaty, is our security towards other third-party global player around us, like Russia, China, etc.
Well, both in the context of the EU-US relationship and in the context of NATO, one of the areas, one of the regions of particular interest is the Western Balkans, and you've been very active on this issue. 2 years ago, the Bulgarian presidency hosted a successful Western Balkan Sofia summit. This spring, the Bulgarian government hosted a meeting of the Berlin process for the Western Balkans. EPP hosted a summit just these last few months in connection with the Croatian presidency's Western Balkan Zagreb summit. So, I mean, the EPP is, you yourself, the EPP, are very strong, committed to the integration of the Western Balkans region. You just recently, I think, signed, you were one of 33 MEPs to sign a letter to the German presidency asking for visa liberalization for Kosovo by the end of this year. My question would be, why is the Western Balkans so important? Why does it need to continue to be so important for the EU?
The so-called Western Balkan countries are in Europe, within the European Union countries, and we cannot have security and stability in the European Union if in our very close neighborhood we have insecurity and instability, and other players are trying to increase their influence there. We are also in debt to this to the citizens of this country, six countries, and they desire to become full European citizens, their countries full member of the European Union. But the European integration is two-sided way. We need to do, as European Union, our job, but also the candidate countries need to overcome their problems from the past, to do the necessary reforms, and I will repeat, overcome the legacy, the negative legacy of the totalitarian regime with the related problems between the countries, between them, between countries with the European Union. For example, as was the case with North Macedonia, Republic of North Macedonia and Greece, but also with my country. This past needs to be known, and the memory of this need to be not forget. We need to transfer the memory to the next generations, but this memory is negative, what is related to the totalitarian regime, and need to be never repeated. This is, again, the great idea on Schuman and Monet, that we live together in a free and prosperous European Union without the legacy of the totalitarian regime from the left or from the National Socialism or Bolshevism and communism.
I'd like to finish this more serious, more policy-related part of the interview with a party political question, and that is about the EPP family, the EPP family across Europe. You're the vice chair of the EPP Group in the European Parliament. When you look at the European Parliament and our political family more broadly, how do you see the EPP family showing leadership during this crisis? You mentioned responsibility, trust. Are there specific things that we should be aware of in seeing how the EPP is leading in this crisis?
For the government led by the EPP parties, the first priority is for sure to save lives. And I think we had good examples that we limited as the first expectations were that the virus will spread much more. We managed to limit, but we should not do from this a party politics. This is an important issue for the life of everybody. It doesn't matter if it's EPP or not. But what is important for us as an EPP, that we recover our economy effective as soon as possible, and we know from where to take the money and how to repay this money, because money are not raining from the sky. Every euro what we are going to take as a loan, European Union is going to take, or the Commission on behalf of the European Union is going to take, need to be repaid, and in a certain moment of time. So we need to be very responsible also towards the recovery fund, towards the sectors which we are going to support, and the sectors which will bring us as European Union on the global level competitive with good goods and services, which can give also a good example for protecting the environment. If we talk about new technology, investing in research and development for in the energy sector, for example, low carbon but not on the cost of the next generation that they should pay our debts. We need, and this is the EPP added value, to have responsibility on each euro which we take as a loan, and to know how to invest these euros and how to repay our debts.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and ideas with us. We have just a couple of more fun, more personal, informal questions we hope we might ask you to finish this interview to help our viewers and our EPP family get to know you better. The first one, we were talking earlier about tourism, travel, the importance of people being able safely to move around again. Is there a place in particular in Europe that you look forward to traveling to as soon as you get the chance, or maybe for summer holidays?
Yes, I hope very much that this will happen, and I can go with my family on the Black Sea coast near to Varna, where in the last few years I spent the holiday with my children. So I hope also this year will be in only a few weeks time possible to do this. Although we expect the Commission, the Council, to have a final decision on the MFF and on the recovery package. So the European Parliament maybe need to come on an extraordinary meeting end of this month, end of July or beginning of August. But I can only recommend to you and to everybody who is looking the Bulgarian Black Sea coast. It's a great sand and water for relax and for holiday.
Well, as my summer plans were canceled, I might very well take up your recommendation. So thanks for that. And I hope you and your family can enjoy indeed a very restful and well-deserved vacation. The last question, one we've asked for, to almost all of our guests. Is there a book, a series, a film which you've recently encountered and would recommend?
Oh yes, now I had indeed much more time by staying at home for 2 months to look at the platforms. I will not do advertisement of the name of the platforms, but there are so many interesting movies, and indeed I'm very interested, as you know, on history, but they are also interested alternative history. What could happen if the Second World War, for example, was won by the other side? And this is something what I could recommend. The Man in the High Castle is the series, which is really quite interesting as an alternative historical possibility. So that was one of the series which I followed with a big interest in the last weeks.
Dr. Andrey Kovatchev, Vice Chair of the EPP Group in the European Parliament and Head of the EPP Group's Bulgarian delegation, thanks so much for your time. And on behalf of the EPP, thanks for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. All the best. Stay healthy, and let's bring Europe back on track.
Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in to this episode of EPP Family Talks. Please join us again next week. We have a special episode when EPP Family Talks goes on the road, so stay tuned for that. Have a great evening and see you next time.